The proximity alarm did not build up slowly. It screamed and did not stop until I slammed my palm against the console. 12 ships appeared on our sensors 40,000 kilometers away. Not ships, cities. Mobile fortresses each longer than Manhattan Island, hanging in the vacuum like they had materialized from nothing. The largest one, URAF dominance according to our translation algorithms, was so massive that looking at it made your brain go quiet. You stopped thinking about tactics or protocol and just stared at something that shouldn't exist. Lieutenant Owen Harley's fingers moved faster than I had ever seen them move. His voice came out tight and controlled in that way that means someone is working very hard not to sound afraid. The transmission decoded in 43 seconds. Mathematical frameworks, 17 of them, all saying the same thing to the humans aboard the Endurance. You have 72 hours to comply. I read the compliance notice 3 times. Surrender your faster-than-light technology. Accept classification as vassal territory under JERC sovereignty governance. Remit 40% of planetary economic output annually, including biological labor quotas to be determined by regional administration. Biological labor, I kept coming back to that phrase. They meant people. They were asking us to send them people. The transmission concluded with a statement I would think about for years afterward. This framework has been accepted by all 214 civilizations previously contacted by the JERC sovereignty. Refusal is not a recognized response category within our diplomatic protocols. Not recognized, as if the concept didn't exist in their language. I sent the full transmission to Earth. Signal delay, 14 minutes each direction. 28 minutes total for a reply. The crew sat in silence. Nobody spoke. What do you say when 12 warships appear and politely inform you that slavery is the cost of survival? Nina Caldwell stood at the back of the bridge with her arms crossed. Our medical officer, good with broken bones and social anxiety in equal measure. She was staring at the sensor display showing those 12 impossible shapes holding perfect formation. They weren't advancing. They weren't retreating. They were just there, waiting with the patience of something that had never lost. I rolled my thumb across my fingertips. Old habit. Worse when I'm processing something my brain doesn't want to accept. 28 minutes. The reply from Earth arrived exactly on schedule. 11 words in clear signal, no encryption, broadcast on every frequency we had. Tell them no, we will handle the rest. Hold your position. Owen looked at me, I looked at him. Nina uncrossed her arms. We will handle the rest, not what should we do, not prepare for evacuation, not even good luck. Just, we will handle this past tense in the certainty like it was already done. Like Earth had been ready for this moment longer than I'd been alive. What Earth said in those 11 words changed more than a battle. It changed what the galaxy thought was possible. Stay with me. 16 hours earlier, I was worried about a malfunctioning coffee dispenser. The Endurance was a cartography frigate, which is a polite way of saying we flew very far away to measure very boring things and then came home. Cramped bridge with console edges worn smooth from decades of use. Recycled air that always smelled faintly metallic no matter how many times engineering insisted the filters were clean. Crew of 38. No combat experience. No weapons beyond standard meteor defense systems. I was the first officer. Commander Iris Chen, 34 years old, career spacer who liked star charts more than people and was reasonably good at both. My grandfather gave me a brass compass before he died. Small enough to fit in a pocket. I carried it on every mission even though compasses don't work in space and never did. The weight of it helped me think. That morning, Nina had been complaining about the coffee dispenser, producing something that tasted like burnt plastic mixed with regret. Owen was calibrating sensor arrays for our next mapping pass through an asteroid cluster. Lieutenant Ramos was running duty rotation discussions that nobody wanted to participate in because duty rotation discussions are cosmically boring. I sat at my station adjusting the compass chain while reviewing star charts. 3 months into a 6-month mission. Deep space gets boring in a way that makes you understand why early astronauts sometimes just stared at walls. The most exciting thing that had happened in 2 weeks was discovering a binary star system that was 0.03% closer than previous measurements indicated. Then the alarm went off and boring ended forever. Earth transmitted again, not to us, to the JERC fleet, in their language. I felt something cold move through my chest. Owen looked up from his console with his mouth slightly open. Nina said very quietly, how long had they been listening? The JERC formation stopped advancing. They had been moving slowly toward our position, patient and inevitable like weather. Now they stopped. Their sensors swept the solar system. Long, slow, thorough scans. Owen leaned forward, His voice had changed, still tight, but now there was something else underneath. Commander, the moon is transmitting, thousands of signals all at once. I pulled up the sensor feed. The lunar surface, quiet and gray for all of human history, was alive with military signals. Structured, coordinated, unmistakably military in nature. Installations buried beneath regolith that public space agencies had never acknowledged. Installations that had been under construction for longer than most of my crew had been alive. Targeting data, positioning protocols, communication handshakes between systems that had been running coordinated drills for years. The JERC computers expected rudimentary infrastructure. They found something that didn't match their assessment models. They scanned again. Third time, same result. My encrypted channel opened. General Paul Vickers, Lunar Command, face I'd never seen before in my life. He spoke without preamble in the way people do when there isn't time for normal human interaction. Commander Chen, you're being read into Pale Rampart Initiative under emergency protocols. What I'm about to tell you was classified above your clearance level until approximately 4 minutes ago. I nodded. My thumb was rolling across my fingertips again. In 2031, 11 scientists published a paper asking why, given statistical certainty of alien life, we had detected no signals. Their answer: civilizations that broadcast their presence don't survive long enough to become civilizations we would recognize. Something older finds them first. He paused. Behind him, I could see command center displays I didn't recognize. Pale Rampart Initiative began that year as a decision. Treat first contact as a strategic emergency already in progress. Prepare for the assumption that whoever finds us will not be friendly. Do it quietly. Do it thoroughly. Tell no one until it matters. How long? My voice sounded strange in my own ears. 40 years of preparation. While the public space program built orbital stations, the real work was happening underneath. 12 command centers beneath lunar surface, each one the size of a sports stadium. The most powerful computing systems ever built on or off Earth, running combat simulations for 27 years. Owen was listening, so was Nina. Half the bridge crew had stopped what they were doing to hear this. Vickers continued. You grew up knowing about orbital stations, Mars colonies, asteroid mining, all visible, all documented. What you didn't know beneath that public picture was another one entirely. A fortress moon. A civilization that chose to build in silence. The channel closed. I sat very still and thought about every news report I'd ever seen about space exploration. Every press conference about peaceful expansion into the solar system. Every school presentation about humanity's future among the stars. All of it had been real, and all of it had been the visible layer over something else. The JERC sent reinforcements, 3 fleet groups, 61 ships total according to Owen's count. They moved into inner system formation, coordinated and professional. 40,000 years of military doctrine refined across 214 successful compliance operations. Earth's response came 12 minutes later. The asteroid belt started moving. Not orbital drift, coordinated movement, purposeful and rapid. Dozens of asteroids shifting positions in patterns that made my sensor algorithms throw error messages. Owen pulled up visual confirmation. His hands had stopped shaking. Now he was just focused in that way people get when something impossible is happening, and they need to understand it anyway. They aren't asteroids, he said. They're hollowed, fitted with drives, weapons, sensor spoofing. They've been there for years, Commander. Hidden among 40,000 legitimate rocks. 140 autonomous drone warships disguised as debris. The Thorn Wall fleet going active. The battle lasted 2 days. I'm not a military officer. I don't have training in fleet tactics or weapon systems. What I can tell you is what I saw on sensors and what Owen explained in the brief moments when he had time to explain anything at all. The Thorn Wall drones moved in distributed swarms, dozens of angles simultaneously, microjump FTL capability, short-distance tactical repositioning. They would appear inside JERC formations, fire, and vanish before return fire arrived. The JERC doctrine, refined over 4,000 years, had no answer for this. Their ships were built for sustained bombardment and patient, overwhelming force against targets that stayed in one place. Humanity didn't stay in one place. The third JERC fleet group moved toward Mars. 800,000 civilians living in tunnel networks carved over 40 years of colonial expansion. Owen tracked the landing forces descending toward evacuated habitats. Open airlocks, easy access. They're going in, he said quietly. The tunnels weren't a simple grid. They were organic, carved over decades by people who knew the rock intimately. The resistance lasted 31 hours. Mining tools turned out to be effective at close range. Specialized colonial environment suits more resistant than JERC databases had predicted. Defenders who knew every tunnel intersection and every emergency shelter consistently outmaneuvered invaders who were following maps that didn't account for unauthorized expansions. The JERC pulled back without taking a single habitat. Nina said something about coffee being a good idea. Nobody answered. We were all watching sensor feeds of a battle humanity wasn't supposed to be able to fight. The Endurance got caught in a patrol sweep while recovering a damaged drone. Our fault. We'd moved too close trying to retrieve the unit before it drifted into JERC scan range. They were on us in 8 minutes. 6 soldiers in armor. Faces wider than human faces, flatter, with large copper-colored eyes that reflected the corridor lighting in ways that made them look like they were glowing. They spoke through translation software in careful, precise English. They took me, left my crew alone. I learned later that their protocols specified detention of useful individuals for information extraction. First officers apparently qualified as useful. Detention Module Gamma aboard one of their smaller ships. Pressurized compartment with atmosphere mixture close enough to Earth standard that I could breathe without assistance. They sat me in a chair that wasn't designed for human anatomy. I shifted my weight and tried to find a position that didn't make my spine hurt. 11 hours, that's how long they held me. A young JERC soldier sat across from me for most of that time. His superiors addressed him in tones I recognized even without understanding the language. Instruction mixed with condescension. The way senior officers talk to junior officers who are still learning how things work. His name, translated, was Meshin. He asked me questions in carefully constructed English that had probably been rehearsed. "Why are you fighting?" I didn't answer immediately. The compass was in my pocket. I could feel the weight of it. "Your casualties are significant," Meshin continued. "Our fleet is larger, our weapons demonstrably more powerful. We offer survival. We offer peace that has lasted across 214 civilizations for 4,000 years. Why are you resisting what every species before you has accepted?" He wasn't angry. That was the thing that struck me most clearly. He was genuinely confused. I thought about how to answer, about what words would translate properly, and what concepts might not have equivalents in his framework. "You are offering us survival as servants," I said finally. "Peace as long as we do what you tell us to do, a place in your structure which means your structure, your rules, your decisions about what our lives are worth. That is not survival as we define it. That is something else. We have a word for it." Meshin ran the word through his translation system, looked at me with those large copper eyes that didn't blink the same way human eyes blink. "I do not understand this concept," he said after a long pause. "The translation provides definition, but the definition does not resolve. You prefer uncertainty and struggle to certainty and structure. This is not logical. It's not about logic. Then what is it about?" I touched the compass through the fabric of my pocket. "It's about who gets to decide what happens to us, and we decided that we do." He was quiet for a long time, not thinking about his response, I realized. Genuinely trying to process something his entire framework had no category for. A 4,000-year empire built on accepted hierarchy. The idea that a species might prefer difficulty on their own terms to ease on someone else's terms wasn't a political position to him. It was a thing he had no way to understand. That conversation, sitting in a chair that hurt my back while a young soldier tried to understand why we wouldn't accept what every other species had accepted, felt more important than anything happening on the sensor feeds. Not the weapons, not the ships, not the tactics. This, two people from completely different frameworks trying to find words for concepts that might not translate. Meshin returned me to my crew 6 hours later. No explanation. His superiors had given him orders, and he followed them with professional efficiency. I was back on the Endurance bridge before I fully processed that I wasn't going to be detained longer. Owen looked up when I walked in. "Commander, they're leaving." The sensor display showed something I hadn't expected to see. 61 JERC warships reforming for faster-than-light departure, pulling back after 48 hours of sustained pressure from the Thorn Wall fleet. Lunar mass drivers had made orbital positioning geometrically untenable. The Mars operation had been abandoned. They were retreating. The monitoring channels that various civilizations used to track major events went completely silent for 6 minutes. Then they erupted with more traffic than our systems could process. Owen tried to run translation algorithms on the chatter, but there was too much, too fast, in too many languages. One word kept appearing in every language. He highlighted it on the display. Impossible. Nina stood at the back of the bridge, watching the retreating signatures. The moon that had turned out to be a fortress. The asteroid belt that had turned out to be a fleet. She said very quietly, "Is it though?" Nobody answered. We didn't need to. I thought about Meshin and his copper eyes and his genuine confusion. Thought about the 11 words that Earth had transmitted without hesitation. Thought about 40 years of people working in secret to make that no possible. Thought about what it meant that humanity had looked at statistical certainty of hostile first contact and decided to prepare in silence rather than hope for the best. Everything I thought I knew about our species had been the surface layer. Underneath, decades of preparation. A civilization that treated survival as something you build toward, not something you hope for. The Jerk formation completed FTL transition and vanished from our sensors. 61 warships that had arrived expecting compliance and found something they had no protocols for. Owen started running damage assessment on recovered Thorn Wall units. Nina went to check on crew who'd been injured during the patrol's sweep boarding action. Ramos began coordinating with Lunar Command for new patrol routes now that the immediate threat had passed. I sat at my station and looked at the sensor display showing empty space where an empire had been 12 minutes ago. Rolled my thumb across my fingertips and tried to process that the galaxy had just changed in ways I didn't have words for yet. My encrypted channel opened again. Vickers, looking tired in the way people look after 2 days without sleep. Commander Chen, good work holding your position. The Galactic Council has requested Earth send a representative to formal session. They want to hear directly from someone who was present during the engagement. A diplomat? I asked. We don't have diplomats trained for this situation, Commander. We have you. First human to speak with Jerk personnel. First human officer to maintain position during their retreat. You're going to the council. The channel closed before I could respond. Nina came back to the bridge with coffee from the newly repaired dispenser. She handed me a cup without saying anything. It tasted like burnt plastic mixed with regret, exactly the way it had tasted 16 hours ago before the alarm went off. Some things stay the same even when everything else changes. 3 weeks later, I sat in a chair that wasn't designed for human anatomy, in the largest room I had ever seen. The Galactic Assembly Hall was cathedral-sized in a way that made cathedrals seem modest. Vaulted ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. Seating arranged in concentric circles, each ring representing a different tier of council membership. 31 species present for this session. The lighting was calibrated to the average of 31 different visual preferences, which meant it was slightly wrong for everyone. I was the first human to attend a formal council session. The Jerk diplomat presenting their account was older than Meshin. Practiced smoothness in every gesture, careful word choices, the kind of professional competence that comes from decades of representing an empire. But underneath that smoothness, I could see something that wasn't quite certainty anymore. A hairline crack in a structure that had been solid for 4,000 years. He called humanity's defense unexpected infrastructure of unknown origin, as if Earth's own moon had surprised them, as if the Thorn Wall fleet had materialized from nothing instead of being built deliberately over decades. The sullen representative, a species that looked vaguely like an upright salamander with too many fingers, interrupted with a question delivered in clipped, precise language. Why did your assessment protocols fail to detect defensive architecture of this scale? The Jerk diplomat handled it smoothly, acknowledged gaps in initial survey data, mentioned that humanity had demonstrated unexpectedly sophisticated sensor spoofing capabilities, suggested that revised protocols would prevent similar intelligence failures in future operations. Future operations. He said it casually, as if the retreat was a temporary setback rather than the first time in recorded history that the Jerk sovereignty had withdrawn a compliance notice. The Orth representative, crystalline structures growing from a base that might have been biological or might have been mineral, asked whether this represented intelligence failure or intentional misrepresentation of threat assessment to the Council. That question landed differently. Several representatives shifted in their seating. The Jerk diplomat's response took longer to formulate. I watched and tried to understand the dynamics I was seeing. This wasn't just about humanity. This was about whether the Jerk sovereignty's competence could be trusted, whether their 4,000-year track record of successful compliance operations meant anything when faced with a species that had chosen to prepare rather than hope. They called me to speak twice. First time was formal introduction, Earth's request to participate as an independent entity in council proceedings. I read from prepared text that diplomats back home had written. Professional language about mutual cooperation and respect for sovereign decision-making. The second time was different. 3 council members asked to hear directly from the human representative about what had happened. Not the official account. My account, what I had seen. I stood in the speaker's position, a raised platform at the center of the concentric circles, 31 species watching. I rolled my thumb across my fingertips once, then stopped myself. The alarm went off at 0400 ship time, I said. 12 vessels appeared on sensors. The largest was so massive that looking at it made rational thought difficult. I sent the compliance notice to Earth. The signal delay was 14 minutes each direction, 28 minutes total for a response. I paused, the room was completely silent. Earth's reply was 11 words. Tell them no, we will handle the rest. Hold your position. That was when I realized my government had been preparing for hostile first contact longer than I had been alive. That every public statement about peaceful expansion into space had been true and had also been the visible layer over something else. A fortress moon. Autonomous warships disguised as asteroids. 40 years of work done in silence. The sullen representative leaned forward. How long had you known before the Jerk arrived? How long had your species known that contact was coming? Long enough, and you told no one else. No. Why? I thought about how to explain it. Because we did not know who to trust. Because we were new to this, and the galaxy was large, and the information that something predatory was operating in it was the most important information we had ever had. We protected it the way we protect important things. We kept it close. That answer seemed to satisfy some representatives. Others looked troubled. The Jerk diplomat watched me with an expression I couldn't read. After the formal session ended, 3 representatives approached me separately, all from tributary species that had accepted Jerk compliance notices decades or centuries ago. They came one at a time, carefully spaced so it wouldn't look like coordination. The first asked about mutual defense arrangements, whether Earth's defensive framework was extensible to other systems. I told them I wasn't authorized to make commitments. Earth's diplomatic apparatus was still being assembled, but I didn't say no. I said, tell me about your situation. The second asked if the Pale Rampart framework could be adapted for species without significant military infrastructure, whether the principles could be taught. I gave the same answer. Tell me about your situation. The third simply asked, how did you know you could refuse? That question hurt to hear. This representative species had been tributary to the Jerk for 300 years. They asked the question like someone who had forgotten that refusal was even a category of response. We didn't know, I said honestly. We thought there was a reasonable chance we would lose, but we decided that being destroyed while defending ourselves was preferable to surviving under someone else's control. That might have been wrong. It might have been arrogant, but it was our choice to make. The representative was quiet for a long time. Then they said something in their own language that my translator rendered as, thank you for the gift of that sentence, and walked away. The older Jerk diplomat approached, while I was standing at the refreshment station, trying to figure out which beverages were safe for human consumption. He stood next to me in that carefully casual way. That means a conversation is about to happen that both parties will pretend is spontaneous. We would like to understand how your species broke the pattern, he said quietly. What pattern? What happens when we arrive? Every civilization has followed the same sequence. Initial denial, threat assessment, eventual acceptance. You did not follow it. I selected a beverage that the scanner indicated was mostly water. We were not following your sequence. We were following ours. And what is yours? I took a sip. It tasted like water that had been filtered through something mineral. We look at what is true, then we decide what we are willing to do about it. Then we do that thing all the way without stopping. He was silent for several seconds. That is a very simple description. Yes, it is also the most dangerous thing I have ever heard. The formal outcome arrived the next day. Jerk's sovereignty formally withdrew the compliance notice for the solar system. The Galactic Council added a new entry to their records. First new classification category in 800 years. Under humanity's entry, the threat classification field read, Independent Defensive Entity, category unresolved. I learned later that the Jerk sovereignty's internal documents used different language. Threat class entity, significant concern. The monitoring channels erupted again that night. Not with confusion this time, with questions. 37 species asking Earth for direct communication. The Jerk sovereignty issued no statement at all. That silence, the older diplomat told me 3 months later, was the loudest thing his people had heard in 4,000 years. 5 years passed. I am now an ambassador, not because I trained for it or because I understood diplomatic protocol, because I was the first human to sit in that council chamber, and the first human to speak with JERC personnel in detention, and the first human to maintain position during their retreat. Sometimes you become what the moment requires instead of what you prepared for. My office is on Pale Rampart 1, a diplomatic station at the L4 Lagrange point. It has a window. I look at the stars every morning because the view reminds me of something easy to forget in the complicated work of maintaining interspecies relationships. The stars do not care. They were there when the first humans felt afraid, when they felt wonder, when the 2031 paper was published, when the decision was made, when the fleet arrived, when Meshen sat across from me trying to understand a concept his framework had no category for. Stars were always there. They don't care. We care. That is the difference that mattered most. The station is not large by galactic standards. It is the most significant structure humanity has ever built in deep space, not because of its size, but because of its meaning. It is not a military installation. No weapons. No defensive systems beyond basic meteor protection. Plainly and completely a place for conversations. That was a deliberate choice. Not everyone agreed with it. I argued for it in meetings with people who had much more experience than me. I understood something from those 11 hours in detention, from Meshen's confusion, from the JERC diplomat's careful question about how we broke their pattern. The thing that shocked the galaxy was not the Thorn Wall fleet. It was the 11 words, the refusal, and the question after refusal was, what comes after? The Accord of Open Stars is not a military alliance, not a traditional mutual defense treaty. It is a voluntary agreement among independent civilizations to maintain independence from external hierarchy while supporting each other's right to make their own choices. 11 species signed the first year, 4 more the second year, 3 currently in active discussions. None coerced, none required to contribute fixed percentages or maintain standardized military capabilities, none classified as superior or subordinate. The JERC sovereignty calls it destabilizing. They are right. It is. Specifically destabilizing to the structure they spent 4,000 years building. The complicated part is that the JERC sovereignty is not humanity's enemy. I am precise about this in every formal statement. They were aggressors. They issued a compliance notice. They sent 61 warships. None of that is forgiven or forgotten, but they are also a civilization. Billions of individuals. 4,000 years of history, art, philosophy, scientific achievement. A species now navigating an identity crisis that humanity caused. Not because we wanted to, but because we declined to be defeated. The most dangerous thing about a confused empire is not its anger. Anger is predictable, containable, something you can plan for. A confused empire does not know what it is anymore, does not know which of its foundational assumptions are still valid. That uncertainty makes every interaction unpredictable. Humanity did something I would not have predicted 5 years ago. We helped them. Not with strings-attached control, not with demands for concessions, with information sharing. Access to economic models that allowed defensive architecture to be built without public accounting systems. Neutral facilitation of conversations between the sovereignty and tributary species, now quietly renegotiating their relationships. None of it is comfortable, none of it is simple. The older JERC diplomat's name is Serath. He visits Pale Rampart 1 regularly now. Precise, honest, genuinely trying to find approaches that work instead of defaulting to methods refined over millennia. He told me about Meshen once, in one of those conversations that happen after formal meetings end. The young soldier left the military 2 years ago. He is studying linguistics now, specifically the construction of concepts across species boundaries. How civilizations develop words for things they have never experienced. I asked if that was ironic or the right outcome. Serath considered the question carefully. I believe it is both. On a morning in late April, 3 months before this moment, an unknown signal arrived on long-range monitoring arrays. Communication signal. Mathematical format the system did not recognize. Flagged as potentially intentional, potentially organized, potentially from a civilization we had no prior contact with. Unknown species, outer rim, beyond any current council presence. Someone new. I stood at my window that morning and looked at stars that have been there longer than any species, currently arguing about territorial rights or compliance frameworks or the proper structure of diplomatic relationships. Thought about the 2031 paper, the decision, the 40 years of quiet work, the 11 words, the battle I watched from the bridge of a cartography frigate, Meshin in the detention compartment asking why we would choose uncertainty over structure. The council chamber. The three quiet conversations with tributary species who had forgotten that refusal was possible. The accord signatories. Serath's careful honesty. Meshin studying how civilizations build vocabulary for experiences they have not yet had. All of it brought the galaxy to a different place. Not perfect, not solved, different, more possibility, more danger. More of the complicated work of actually existing alongside each other without defaulting to hierarchy or force. Someone new is out there now, transmitting in formats we do not recognize, waiting to see what kind of response they receive. I think about what kind of first contact they deserve, not a compliance notice, not 12 warships with a 72-hour deadline, something else, something that did not quite exist before, something still being built carefully from everything that happened since the alarm went off. I sit down my coffee. The dispenser still produces something that tastes faintly like burnt plastic mixed with regret. Nina says some things never change even when everything else does. I open the diplomatic frequency, not the defense grid, not military command. The channel built specifically for first contact under Pale Rampart Initiative's revised civilian protocols. The ones humanity rewrote over 3 years of careful work to begin not with compliance, not with threat assessment, but with a different word entirely. I press the transmit key and speak the words we developed together. Not we will handle the rest, but we would like to understand the rest. Same cadence, different future. I say hello and wait to see who answers.